All right. I'm not sure exactly what happened with the link there, but I am in. Um, so, Carlos, since it's just you and you're only listening, I guess I'll just go through the presentation, but with no uh, interaction for the dialogue, just as a practice. And I guess we could use this for the future. Um, yeah, I think actually what I'll do is wait a couple more minutes and we'll just, if no one else shows up, then I don't know. I'll just run through it with the recording and then just see if anything makes sense to keep from this. Uh, yeah, not sure what led to the thing. But welcome to this week's Friday Framework, where we're looking at the culture map. We looked at fulfillment ROI last time, which is like a foundational concept for us and how we work with clients, and looking both individually and organizationally at the energy we invest in things and the value they produce for us. If that's a positive return, that's a fulfilling experience. And so that's really what we're doing, both for ourselves, our clients, individually and organizationally. One of the big areas that we do this in is in culture, and helping you understand, like, where are you at and what does culture actually look like. So today we're going to get into that as to what is actually culture. So to start off, what culture is and isn't is going to be the first thing we look at. And then we're going to look at a map framework to just sort of say, where is your culture in sort of a quick 4-box. We'll do a quick assessment, chance to kind of share our thoughts, do some discussion around that, and then look at next steps. Like, where do you go from here to work on your own culture? Hopefully you've got something for the next 30, 60, 90 days, as well as opportunity to connect with us if you need to. So first, what culture is and what it isn't. Culture is not your mission statement. It's not the perks you offer, and it's not the ping pong table. Though I do love ping pong and would totally enjoy having a ping pong table in the place that I work, it is not the culture. It's much closer to what happens when no one is looking, because culture ends up being sort of the unwritten rules, sometimes hopefully written rules, but the way we act when we don't have anyone around to sort of set the pace. So what does this look like in sort of a graphical format? So we've got the place we work, we've got our environment, we've got the people. So where is the culture in the midst of all this? And a lot of times people would say, well, it's the environment in which we work. That's the culture. It's like the air we breathe. And while I've used that analogy, and I think that there's a lot of truth to that, one other piece here is looking at that culture is actually all of those connections. It's the stuff that happens between individuals. And it's also the stuff that happens between us and our relationship to the environment. So the environment itself doesn't carry the culture. That's static. What's dynamic, and where culture lives, because culture is dynamic, is all of the connections between those nodes, those that we work with, as well as the environment in which we work. So that's what we're looking at when we're talking about culture, is what's going on between people, what's going on in our heads, in our hearts, and in our actions. So just a couple of interesting, I guess, 3 statistics about culture. So 88% of what? 88% of employees believe strong culture is key to business success. I would agree with them. I'd be one of those 88%. But that's saying almost 9 out of 10 people are looking to you, if you're in a leadership role, to get clear and define what is culture in this organization, in this space. 4 times the companies with strong cultures see a revenue growth. So compared to companies that don't have strong culture, as defined by Forbes, it's a 4x return. So culture not only is something people are looking for, it's something that's driving your results, specifically your bottom line. Then 10x. 10x cultures are 10 times more likely than compensation to predict turnover. So lower compensation with more of a healthy environment culture-wise is going to lead to retention. It doesn't matter how much you pay. If your culture is toxic, people can't breathe and they're going to leave. So that's basically 3 quick things to say people are looking for this, and it impacts not only your bottom line, but your people. So if you're interested in keeping a place in an organization with a beating heart, a focus on a human-centric way of doing things, this should probably pique your interest. Culture is important. So, okay, great. We've decided culture is something we want to have. What is it and what does it look like? Well, first off, culture affects everyone every day. From the top, leadership behaviors dictate culture, management practices reinforce culture, and the daily team interactions are the lived reality of culture for most people. So culture cascades through every level. But one thing to notice is you see this, it looks like it's just a waterfall, it's coming back downhill. We have a thing called culture champions, and how they operate is like salmon. They are the people that are going to go against the current if the culture's not working and say, hey, something needs to change. I'm going to take this team interaction and I'm going to bring it up to my manager. And managers are going to say, I don't know enough of the why on why we're doing this. And so my team is floating. We don't have good connection between each other. Our culture is fragile. I'm going to salmon my way up to the leadership level to share that information. So that's what our culture champions are doing in our space. So how does culture look in this 4-box framework that we've created? What we've noticed is culture really lives on 2 axes. One is how much you talk about it, which is to say, is it something that, well, you just know, which means it's implicit, or is it something that is clearly stated and then stated again, and then stated again to make it much more explicit? And the other side, you have how much do we focus on it at the conscious level? How intentional are we in the culture that we're designing? Or is it just something ad hoc that happens to us? Is culture something happening in the back end? So in these 4 boxes, if you have an ad hoc culture that's implicit, we call that the riptide. If you've ever been in a large body of water like the ocean and you're standing out 4 or 5 feet, water's maybe up a little bit past your waist to your shoulders, and all of a sudden you feel something underneath you pull. And that is the riptide. That is the tide as it comes against the shore and crashes and comes back underneath the water you're standing in. It's pulling you away from the shore and you don't see it. You just all of a sudden you feel it. And it can pull you in multiple different directions. And when you're in it, it's really hard to get your footing. That's what an ad hoc implicit culture has the tendency to do, is it causes a riptide for people in it. So let's say we want to get a little bit more intentional about it. So we start like making it consistent and the way that we practice our behaviors, but we don't tell anybody. We just kind of like have that conversation maybe one time. We've hit a really rough patch, and for the people who are still in the company, we say, hey, we need to get real intentional about this culture. And we have a staff meeting, we have an offsite, and we define it. And we say, we're going to do it this way. Okay, great. Now we hire some new people. It's not written down anywhere. It's like they've walked into a room with the lights off. This is a lights out type culture. You just got to bump around into things until you figure it out. So that takes a lot of time and possibly causes a lot of bruises and might leave our people who are new looking for the door because at least we can see out there. So in a lights out culture, we have a tendency to have people who bounce off of our organization, and we don't quite understand why, because we've talked about culture, we've done these things, but we haven't made them explicit. So how about an explicit culture that's ad hoc? We call that a cacophony. That's like everybody in every department coming up with what they understand culture to mean. And there's no consistency, and everyone's sharing that, but it's all becoming white noise because it doesn't blend together into a harmonious song or something we want to listen to. It's everyone with a megaphone shouting their perspective. That cacophony makes it really hard to stay focused on the work. So we're being really explicit, but we're not being consistent. We're not taking a conscious level, high level view of saying, how is this work for all of us? And every department is basically becomes almost like a fiefdom to themselves. And it might be all positive, but it's different flavors. And it can be confusing for people, especially when they come in like, oh, I've learned the culture of my team, but it's not consistently played out. This is the type of thing that happens when you have leadership teams that have a lot of, well, I guess lack of trust with each other. And so they'll have decisions and they'll say, yep, we're going to do this. And then they go into the departments and they reinterpret that the way they want to. It's like, you know what, that doesn't apply to us. Here's how we're going to live that out. And then all of a sudden you have two departments that have very different understandings because their leadership has gone in very different directions because it's not consistent. So if you can take it all the way to the fourth box, that's where you start ending up in flow. The culture becomes the defining boundaries of the directions that you're going. It gives you an orientation. And if you were part of conversations with us in the past, we talk about progress being different from activity. And progress is a three-step process of orientation, activation, and sustained momentum. That flow is getting everyone rowing in the same direction because we're going to the same goal and we have the same boundaries and expectations on how we're going to get there. And so what we're doing is we're putting our energy into the things that move us forward, not into the confusion of multiple voices of a cacophony, not into the efforts to slowly move around and not bump into things and the lights out, and not watching our stepping and hoping that we're not going to get pulled under with the riptide. We can put our energy into actually getting the work done. And all of a sudden, if you go back and look at fulfillment ROI in our list video, we reduce the amount of energy it takes to get things done, which even if we do nothing to increase the value proposition of what we're doing, makes it a much more fulfilling experience. So some assessments for you just to think about as you're looking at this is, and we'll share a document in a little bit to help walk through this framework, but what are the documentation pieces of your culture? Do you have them written down? And is it not just written down or put up on a wall, but actually explained what that looks like? How do we know what the behavioral outcomes are of these principles? Can you articulate that culture? If I went to 5 people in different departments within your organization, from the high leadership to the people working on the floor in the manufacturing space, to the people that are doing the day-to-day tasks, people have been there a year, people have been there 5 years. Are there any distinctions in different ways we understand culture, or is there a pretty consistent message? Do you have a rallying cry that helps you get consistent on what you're doing? Do you use your cultural values when you're hiring? And this is a tricky one because sometimes they just weren't a good fit can be a cover-up for some not great practices. So you have to be really an understanding of where is the edge of your cultural fit versus your predefined preference as the people step into your space. And I think one of the pieces that I like to look at and work with people when they're doing this is when you step outside of the bounds of what's normal for you, does your organization see that with curiosity and say, I wonder why people would show up that way? What value does that bring? Can we learn more about this? Maybe there's something we're missing. Or do they show up with critique of like, you know what, you're not like us, you're not doing this the right way. You need to step back in line. If you were looking at it from the curiosity, then culture fit can be a really great tool to use. If it becomes critique of like, oh, you know what, they're not a hard worker. They're just talking all the time, thinking about big ideas, but they're not grinding it out with their nose to the grindstone. They're just not a fit for who we are because we're a fast-paced organization. Well, maybe that fast-paced organization is running off a cliff real quick because nobody's raising their head to look around. So asking questions of what could this person potentially bring to the table as you think about what does culture fit mean can be really, really beneficial in those hiring decisions. But if you're not asking it at all, then it's just a crapshoot of who's showing up and wondering what they bring to the table because everyone's going to bring something. Because even if you don't think about it at all, you don't talk about it at all, you will have an ad hoc, implicit type culture, which is basically riptide. So just need to make sure we're having those conversations. And are they part of your performance reviews? Are you just looking at metrics of success as to the numbers that people are producing? Or are you looking at things like fulfillment? Are you looking at things like deeper sense of clarity? I've made this position better for the person who's going to have it after me. This year, I've solidified and given some clarity around that. How is that showing up? Our cultural value is that we act out of integrity. I can name 3 times where I did something that was not to the benefit of our company, but to our customer, because that's who we are and that's how we do things. Those type of things really help say this matters because people pay attention to what you ignore, what you ask them about, and what you measure. So if you're not measuring your culture, people aren't going to be paying as much attention to it. And then do you have regular rituals that reinforce the culture? How do you have your rallying cry? How do you bring people together around it? How does it show up in your meetings with your teams? How does it show up at your offsites with your leadership? What do you do on a regular basis to make sure that the culture is getting embedded and is being kept top of mind? So just some quick check-ins for you as you're going through this stuff. Some things you can do over the next 90 days if you're looking at, okay, I want to address my culture. Name some truths. What is already happening? So in the next month, next 30 days, and you have to be really real with yourself and go around and just start saying, how do people operate here? That looks pretty consistent. but may not be named. What does that look like? What are some of the cultural truths? And maybe some of them are already known and you can get the 3 right out of the gate. That's great. How are they showing up in the behaviors of your people? Then share them with your team and gather input. Does everyone else agree? Maybe have everyone do this activity for the 30 days and then compare. Is there any consistency with the top 3 cultural truths for your team? If not, is it because you have so many truths that there's a lot of things going on and maybe you lack some clarity and it might be a little closer to that cacophony style of culture? Or is there some, yeah, you know what, this actually is something we all see. This is part of who we are. We need to solidify that to make sure that we can express that to anyone who's working with us or coming to be part of our team. And then in the 90 days, how do you turn that into a practice? How do you make sure that you're making a touchstone, something you're coming back to? And one really great place is in meetings. How is this something that we say, here are some of our norms for how we operate in meetings. Here are some of our norms for why we have meetings that are reflections of our culture, because meetings become the touch point of a lot of the way we do business. And maybe we find out we don't have enough meetings, and maybe sometimes we find out we have to have more meetings or different meetings, or actually have more people come to them so that we're not having multiple meetings afterwards. Sometimes less is more and sometimes more is better. So it's just having the conversation and figuring out one of these main channels that tends to be a space that people get frustrated with communication is meetings. How are we reflecting our culture in the way we do meetings, in the way we operate them, in the way we actually set them up to begin with? So there's some areas just to step into as you're looking at ways to improve the culture. Some discussion prompts that you could use with your teams as you're getting into this. Culture, behavior, and organization that everyone knows, but nobody's talking about. Have that be a topic for a 15 to 20-minute conversation with your leadership team or your team at one of your meetings. And just say, what is it? And maybe come back to it. Maybe have this be something that you do once a week, just to touch on questions like this. If you had a warning label, what would be the warning label for your culture? Don't ask too many questions, because we get frustrated if you don't get it right away. Oh, interesting. I wonder if that's something that's helping us or hindering us in our ability. Or we take care of people. If you've hit a rough patch, that's whether at work or outside of work, let us know. Like, we want to be present for our people holistically. And what does that look like? How does that show up for us? And if there's something you could stop doing, what would you do with that? Yeah, so we have shared in the chat that your current culture is what you tolerate. Absolutely, because that becomes the implicit, as you said, like what do people pay attention to? What you ignore, what you question them about, and what you measure. So if you're just ignoring some not great cultural elements, those become your cultural elements, because that's what people see. They're like, oh, well, I guess it doesn't matter if I turn my work in on time, if I meet that deadline, because no one else has gotten in trouble for it. It just gets an extension and we make an excuse. So our culture here is deadlines don't matter. If that's the culture you're looking for, then you've now had that culture. But if you're ignoring it because you just don't want to have a difficult conversation because you may have not stated the standards correctly, make sure you get clear on that so that the culture you want is the culture you have. So if you've figured out, like, you know what, I'm in, I want to do this, what now? How do I do this? Outside of these conversations, like, what does it mean to redesign my culture? Well, we think that there are 5 phases that you go through as you step through this space. And the first one is just taking it from what it is now, which is sort of ad hoc and implicit, which is to say invisible, make it visible. So what is that like? It's like turning on the lights. So the first step, if you think of this whole culture piece as like an office building, and you want people to do their work here, and you want it to function well to help support people in doing their work, but you never turn the lights on, that's going to be difficult. You have to be there so long before you memorize where everything is. So help people understand the layout of your culture by turning on the lights. So once it's visible, let's make it intentional, which is to say, you know what, culture is the culmination of the actions that we either ignore or engage in. So we can design it. So let's start by defining the purpose. What is it that we want our culture to do? What's the floor plan of this place? How do we want this place laid out? Why are we actually operating what we're doing today? Let's get the why. So that makes it intentional. And then we're looking to make it designable, because now that we realize we can do this, we just have to make choices. We can create the floor plan. So we can draw out how we want everything to interact with each other. And then we start to build out our culture. Well, it's great. Now it's on paper. We've worked with the architect. We've got the perfect designed culture. We've got to make it actionable, because if it never changes as a behavior that shows up in the way we do what we do, it's not going to be a culture change. It's going to be a culture map. And that doesn't really help us get anywhere. So now we have to rearrange and install. Are there things we have to perhaps do differently? Do we need a different organizational design? Do we perhaps need some different roles? Do we have a different way that we define what a role is? Do we need to talk about accountabilities? Are we measuring the right things? Are we putting the things in practice that help us make sure that this action becomes part, or this culture becomes an action of what we do on a day-to-day basis? Once it's set up, how do we sustain it? Because a lot of time we talk about, mentioned earlier, progress is about orientation, activation, and then sustained momentum. Because we do this culture project and everyone gets on board and we start doing it. We have a rally day, we have a rally cry, and it's 3 months later and something else comes up and we drift a little bit because nobody's made accountable for it. So we have to own and maintain it. What does that mean to maintain the culture for everyone in the organization? What does that mean for particular roles in the organization? How do we make sure that we are owning this at every level and then maintaining it, so that we continue to have a consistent culture? So a question to ask yourself is, what phase are you in? What phase do you think you really need help at this point? So as you're thinking about your organization, where do you need that support? Do you just need to turn the lights on just to figure out what the heck is it that we have right now? Is it getting all the way down and say, you know what, we've been talking about this for a while. We need to make it sustainable. We've made it actionable, but we haven't figured that out. So we need to figure out step 5. We need to own and maintain. So what you can do from here. If you want to take action with this, we're going to be sharing in the chat, as well as if you're watching this replay, go to ipnadvisors.com in the downloads. There's a culture map, which is basically the walkthrough of the framework we looked at, as well as our scale up culture guide that walks through the 5 steps and ways that you can start bringing those into action. So I'm going to share these in the chat real quick. And also, I'm going to share a quick LinkedIn post that I just wrote that's very much on like what employees are looking for, that is in this culture space, kind of like that first slide of what culture is and isn't. So feel free to check that out. And then here is the Scale Up Culture Guide and the Culture Map Assessment. And then with that, I have a quick Zoom poll that we'll be sharing for how this went. Like, what are your thoughts? How could we do this better in the future? And we will be skipping that for now. But if you want to connect with us, if you want to connect with AG, Amanda, or myself to talk some more about how to think about culture, if you have any specific questions, if you want to talk about an engagement, that's great. There's no sales, no pressure here. We just want to help. So well, from this, if you have a quick question, we'd be happy to have the conversation and help provide some value as you move forward with your culture design. So that just thanks for your time. And this is the overview from Inflection Point Nexus Advisor perspective on culture, both what are the different 4-box frameworks of it and how do you start moving forward as you want to design it.